the Constitution has set up certain minimums. And then our other laws just borrow from that. So you have the employment law that then comes to say, hey, before you as an employer let go of somebody, you must have a valid reason. And not just that, it must be related to performance or misconduct. People are a lot more enlightened. I'm a lot more ready to fight for their rights. Let me put it that way. So the number of disputes that end up in court, the Employment and Labor Relations Court is one of the busiest. When you speak with people who are especially from the US and you explain to them what you have to do a separation in Kenya, and they're like, oh my, it's hard to believe. So it definitely, I can understand somebody hesitating, but fortunately or unfortunately, Kenya still stands out as a place to be in Africa.
Hello everyone in Jambu. Welcome to the fifth episode of The Insight Edge, a podcast by RSM Eastern Africa. I am Ashif Kassam, your host, and today we'll be exploring a highly relevant topic on the impact of HR legal and regulatory landscape on East Africa as an investment destination. Joining us today is Anne Babu, one of Kenya's recognized employment law practitioners with 18 years of experience advising employers and employees on a wide range of workplace and labor law matters. She is the founder of Anne Babu and Company Advocates, a specialist employment law firm and an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. She is recognized by the chambers and partners and the Legal 500 as a leading employment lawyer in Kenya, and is also on the board of Gold Star Kenya, bringing extensive experience in governance, employment law, and organizational transformation. Great to have you, Anne.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Ashif.
So, Anne, as we start, just tell us something about your experience, in HR law and what got you there, and then we can go into the deeper discussions.
Okay. So what normally happens for many lawyers is you end up specializing in what your pupil master was specializing in. So it just so happens that my pupil master used to handle a lot of employment matters. And with time, he sort of just started giving them to me to handle. So what happened is that inevitably, it was not by design, it was not intentional. It's just by virtue of the fact that so many of those, clients ended up coming to me, work ended up coming to me. So by the time I was setting up my firm, I found that was the one thing I enjoyed, and I could, stood out for me as something I could see myself doing for some time. Yeah.
You've been involved in a number of years in HR law.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how and where do you see the HR legal and regulatory landscape in East Africa evolving?
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of things. Over the past 2 years, we've had a lot of restructurings. We find almost every other day there's somebody reaching out. They're doing restructurings. And what's bringing this on? Different things. The economy, that's number one. Number two, there's a number of NGOs, INGOs, PBOs that have been greatly impacted by the funding situation. That, of course, started with, what we had with USAID, and then many other funders sort of followed suit. But we are having to support very many employers in the space of just thinking through how can we make our operations more cost effective, more efficient, how can we make the most of the resources that we currently have. Unfortunately, in many cases, it does lead to redundancies. But yes, so restructurings are probably right at the top of the things that we are seeing regulatorily and across board. So that's one thing. And then the next thing is a very steep increase in the number of court disputes. So much so that I think I can say a good chunk of separations end up in court or in another form of dispute resolution forum. And perhaps brought on by the laws that we have at the moment, but also brought on just by the people that we have at the moment. People are a lot more enlightened. I'm a lot more ready to fight for their rights. Let me put it that way. So the number of disputes that end up in court, the Employment and Labor Relations Court is one of the busiest. in the country.
And in terms of the legal side and the regulatory side,
Yeah.
what is the government doing that is, leading to all these cases? Is the legal landscape also changed? Are the rules and regulations
Yeah.
governing this changing?
Yeah.
Or is it that these were always there and people are now becoming more litigious? Or is it the constitution? Because a lot of cases that are there, frame one part of the constitution
Yeah.
as a right for challenge.
Yeah, well, it's everything that you've said. So our laws start with the Constitution. The Constitution has set up certain minimums, and then our other laws just borrow from that. So you have the employment law that then comes to say, hey, before you as an employer let go of somebody, you must have a valid reason. And not just that, it must be related to performance or misconduct or, an operational requirement or incompatibility. So you find your space within that. Obviously, you can opt to do a mutual separation, but it's that sort of framework that we have right now. And for each of those, there are very many rules. So one way or another, sometimes an employer will find themselves, even after ticking all those many boxes, you still end up in court because somebody is not aggrieved. So there is the labor framework in terms of just how to do separations, how to manage performance, how to manage discipline, how to do a redundancy. And then there's the people. Nowadays, people are a lot more ready to challenge. So I don't think it's so much so just Gen Zs, but it's everybody in the workplace nowadays that is ready to say, hey, this is my right, I'm going to take you up on it. And then we also have data. Data protection is also a big thing and is a major reason why people, go to court and they're saying one thing or another. For something even like a recruitment, you've done a recruitment, you didn't shortlist me, I write to you and I say, so why didn't you shortlist me? You don't give me, reasons that make me satisfied, and I go to court. I have a right to, the information that you hold in that pertains to me. So it's the regulatory framework that we have, and then you're dealing with people who are, ready to challenge. Yeah.
So if you take that, MB that you just put forward, how does it create certainty both for the employer and employees, in their working relationship?
Yeah. Well, so when it comes to the employer, very little certainty. The minute a dispute ends up in court, it's in the hands of a third party. So you don't have you have absolutely zero certainty as to how the outcome is going to end up being. And so you find because of that, some employers may opt to, hey, can we do a mutual separation? And there's an increment in mutual separations as well, where employers are trying to control the outcome and bring some level of finality. So let's do a mutual separation as opposed to prolonging this, longer than it needs to be prolonged. But in terms of for employees as well, then, it then becomes on you to figure out and understand what are your rights. What are you entitled to, and that sort of thing. But the flip side also is you find many, especially international organizations, multinationals, and especially those who come from jurisdictions that bear the at will sort of employment. They just find our regulatory regime not one that they want to really, they're not celebrating so much when they have to interact with our laws because they feel very restrictive.
And is this impacting the investment decision, particularly in sectors that require an agile labor force, like outsourcing, which is very seasonal? You lose contracts, you have to do massive retrenchment. How is it affecting this, and how is it affecting Kenya as an investment destination?
I think Kenya sits in a very unique place. Let me put it that way. If organizations are looking for gateways into Africa, it's hard to ignore Kenya, simply because of the peace that we enjoy, the stable environment for a long time that we have had, and so. Many investors will complain, but they may still find themselves not having much of a choice, but having to have their operations based out here, even in terms of just the skill sets that many Kenyans have. So we find that, yes, it might not be it's not a happy sort of, place where many investors find themselves. I had a situation, and I've encountered many of these, where when you speak with people who are especially from the US, and you explain to them what you have to do a separation in Kenya, and they're like, oh my. It's hard to believe. So it definitely I can understand somebody hesitating, but fortunately or unfortunately, Kenya still stands out as a place to be in Africa, and yeah, I think that's what I would say about that. When it comes to outsourcing is our law allows you to outsource as an organization a non-core service. So, for example, for RSM, you're going to outsource, your guard services. Maybe you'll outsource your, other support services. You're not going to outsource the core service. Now, the thing is that those non-core services are essential. So, because there's no way you'll operate without, IT or security or, those sorts of things. And so, for some reason, you still find that investment in that regard is still there with a lot of, people, even when it comes to the BPOs and all that. For some reason, those ones will still thrive because they're non-core, but they're still very necessary. Where they get caught out is the cost of business, because every time there's an increment in labor costs, then somebody has to dig into their pockets. So then that's why you find people are trying to be as creative as possible. How can I get the most but spend the least? And that's the question that many investors are trying to battle with. Yeah.
And how does this compare, across East Africa
Yeah.
and also, other, investment destinations in the world, when we look at our labor laws
Yeah.
and the ease of doing business?
Yeah. Well, at least speaking from East Africa, we are we don't have uniform laws, but they are substantially similar. And if you look at, Tanzania, you look at Uganda, very protective, and largely borrowed from the European sort of, setup that they have there, very protective. And so in that case, I think it's more or less the same thing in the sense that we sit at a place where it's hard to ignore the need to be in Africa, because Africa, of course, is a growing economy with lots and lots of potential. But are we exploiting it to the full? Maybe not, as other destinations that are able to provide, say, everything Kenya can provide, but at a lower cost. So I think that's where the challenge is. If other countries come up, they're able to give what Kenya is giving at a lower cost, and we've had some clients also do that and say, we had operations in Kenya, but what Kenya is doing, we are now doing it in Asia, and it's a bit cheaper. So we are closing our Kenya operations. So the reality is you can't ignore the cost of doing business, the cost of labor, and everything that's connected to it. So it definitely is having an impact. If people can't find cheaper destinations to get their work done, they will do that. And we have had many instances of people say, no, we're going to try Asia for this, because it's a lot cheaper than what we are getting here.
So, it's the attractiveness
Correct.
that is, becoming a critical factor.
Correct. Yeah.
And while we get investments in this part of the world,
Yeah.
the challenge is we can scale it up even further, if the entire structure and the processes were much more clear
Good.
and defined.
Yes. Yes.
There's one question, in a lot of countries, use of alternate dispute, resolution methods
Yes.
are used to settle labor disputes.
Yes.
In Kenya, it's very much discouraged, or it's very difficult to do it. Why is that?
Well, first of all, I think, right from our constitution, by the way, talks about encouraging alternative dispute resolution, which sets the mood for really this is what our country wants. And even if you look at down to some of our laws, they actually provide for, you go for conciliation, you go for mediation, you go for arbitration. And nowadays, even when you go to court, sometimes the court will actually tell you, you guys, we are sending you to mediation. So there is a move and a drive to go that route. The problem is many times when you use those alternative methods, you still find that there is no resolution because parties remain very, firm on their positions. And so sometimes there's even a move to educate the advocates involved in those forums because, let's not be very combative. Let's try and resolve these matters. But you still find that even if you go to mediation, many times people will still come and say, no, let the court decide this matter. And then the truth and reality also is that processes like arbitration are very expensive at the end of the day. And so people will be like, hey, let me try my luck in court. So I think that the system is trying its best to encourage alternative dispute resolution. But when you have arbitration being quite expensive and mediation working in many instances but not in many, then it seems that many things still
Is
end
this
up being
common in
challenged.
labor? I don't see it very common in labor disputes.
Imagine it is. In fact, there used to be a time when the registrar's office would sift through cases, and before you even go to court, you receive a letter telling you, "Hey, you're going into mediation." And there are very many accredited, mediators. Many people have done those courses, so it's there. The challenge may be the fact that when people go into mediation, they ultimately come out and say, "Hey, I still want the court to decide for whatever reason." People maintain very tough stance. And even if you feel like you have some weaknesses in your case, you're like, let me just have the court decide. If the court decides against me, I'll pay. So it's not working as well as it should.
As an HR practitioner,
Yeah.
Kenyan laws are very specific on remuneration structures.
Correct.
Okay? What are the global trends in pay structures? How are they evolving? And where
Yeah.
are the gaps in East Africa
Yeah.
that would make East Africa competitive in terms of attracting foreign investment, especially where labor is a critical part of that investment?
Yeah. I think now one major trend is the fact that remuneration or pay, it's not just about salary anymore. I mean, globally, it's not just about how much you're paying somebody. There is a lot of conversation around how is that work environment. There's a lot of conversation around what other benefits do you have? Are you able to allow people to work remotely? Are there training opportunities? Are you providing for healthcare? What sort of culture do you have in your environment? So that's a conversation that many people you'll find globally will be like, it's not just about the pay, it's everything else. So that's a major, I would say, trend. And so organization that may not necessarily pay as much, but has what is seen to be a very good working environment and opportunities for growth and transparency in pay structure, they seem to, be able to carry the day. Something else that is very a very clear trajectory is nowadays it's not just about how long have you been here. It's about what value are you bringing. So you're not just remunerating somebody because they have, clocked the 5-year mark or the 10-year mark. It's more what are the skills that you're bringing? What is the value that you're adding to the organization? And so that's what's the performance of the company? What's the performance of you as an individual? So it's very much a remuneration structure that's, performance-based, value-based, skill-based, as opposed to just tenure. Because previously, rewarding tenure was very common, but it's not very common nowadays.
The other thing that I see is the issue around Kenya as a standard pay per month model.
Yes.
And it hasn't moved.
No.
In other countries, there are various different model,
Yeah.
hourly rate,
Yes.
per piece rate.
Correct.
And I don't see that in East Africa actually.
Yeah.
Is this something that needs to be brought in because
Yeah.
the flexible working hours
Yeah.
also comes with a flexible a remuneration model.
Yeah.
Today you will not hire university students who won't work 2-3 hours. Yet they could come and work 2-3 hours and do whatever else they want to do. How do you see that landscape evolving and making an opening and bringing into the supply a much bigger pool of people who don't want a full monthly salary?
Yeah, the challenge is, and I think organizations have to do the balance, because if you're wanting to attract good talent, then that good talent across East Africa comes at a price. And that's why sometimes there's even a challenge with something just like a fixed term contract. So you want to bring somebody on board and give them a fixed term contract of 1 year. And this is top talent. Why would they sign up on that when somebody else can give them a longer term contract and give them some form of security? So I think it's a balance that an organization must look at. So if we are going to have variables, and variable pay models, by the way, is something that many organizations consider, but they will still give a base salary. So they'll say, yes, there's a variable component, whether it's the bonuses and all that, or the commissions, but they will still give a base component. And so I don't know that the jurisdiction has evolved fully to the point where you can say, I can come here and do 2 hours and then move to my next job next door and do another 2 hours. I don't know whether I'll be able to meet my monthly, financial requirement. And so I think that's the challenge. In many cases, I don't know that our jurisdictions have evolved enough to be able to accommodate a situation where if somebody just wants to work 2 hours, they'll be able to do that like with multiple organizations. We are very much still in the system where people want some level of stability, especially if they're top talent, and the organization's willing to give that. So I think it's an interesting balance, but I think it's definitely something that is worth considering. That sort of variability, and flexibility in pay models,
I, as an employee,
yeah.
what do I need to be aware of in this evolving landscape when handling talent in terms of performance, in terms of performance management, in terms of promotions, in terms of exits? What are the key issues that employers are missing? Employees are missing and need to actually be looked into in any employee-employer relationship?
Well, I think one thing that is interesting nowadays is it's almost like many organizations have these performance management systems that talk about exceeds expectations and then meets expectations and then below expectations. But more and more, the above and beyond is becoming meets expectations. Like what we would ordinarily consider as meets expectations, you're still expected to go above and beyond. So I think for an employee, I think those are some of the things, because employers are looking for people who have ownership of the business of the organization, people who have taken initiative, people who are going above and beyond, But now, on the other hand, the employees are looking to, yes, they want to give as much as possible, but it's not like 20 years ago where people were, at whatever cost. So I think for an employee, it's one, know where your rights are. If it's you're being held accountable to a performance thing, know what you are entitled to under the law. But also know that at the end of the day, you're dealing with employers who are as much as possible trying to look for those things. Do you have the ownership? So things that we previously thought, they're going above and beyond, slowly but surely just becoming meets expectations.
So, if you were to take one practical case without any names, what would be a case that was handled, pretty badly in terms of separation? And what were the lessons learned? And what was a case that was handled very well? And what were the lessons learned? Would you be able to share that so our viewers can just pick the differences?
I think let me pick performance, because performance, I normally say, is one of the most difficult ways to separate. Because the minute you realize that somebody is not performing, then if they're still on probation, you need to make sure you're managing that performance well enough to, by the time they're on probation, by the time the probation is coming to an end, you've already made up your mind. And you've already actually taken whatever steps you need to take. Why? You go beyond probation, then there is an automatic confirmation that is deemed. So what is our best case scenario? If an employer is not happy with an employee before probation, do your management and everything and your separation and be ready to serve her by the end of probation. Best case scenario. And then for anybody who's already beyond probation, how do you manage that in a way that is good? You notice performance is failing, you call the employee up, you make it very clear these are the things where you're failing. I'm giving you 3 months to work on them. We are having the regular check-ins. At the end of that period, if you have not performed well, then we kickstart the separation process. So that's a good way of doing it. Now, the bad way is, I notice your performance is bad. I perhaps tell you or not tell you. At the end of the year, it's completely unacceptable. I can't work with you anymore. I call HR and I tell HR, this person I can't continue this. Do what you need to do. And, HR sends, maybe a termination letter. And the next thing is you end up in court. but you had very valid reasons to let the person go. The only problem is you didn't follow the process. So our system is very much process-based. Make sure you're following the processes. Make sure somebody is keeping an eye on important times. When does this person's probation end? How long should we put this person on PIP? Those sorts of things. So best case scenario, manage the performance well. Bad scenario, you keep quiet, you don't manage performance, you're afraid of having difficult conversations. And that's the reality. Many line managers are afraid of having difficult conversations. And then one day you're just like, no, I can't deal with this person anymore. They have to go. And then you don't follow a proper process. And then you end up in court.
The younger generation, what we call as Gen Z, is coming into the workforce now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that they need to be aware of in terms of, that there is an expectation of an employer.
Correct.
And there's also your expectation and how you see things.
Correct.
What is the balance? What is the advice that you would give them in terms of meeting your performance obligations?
I think number one is be very clear on what you're here for, and don't be afraid to ask. I'm here, I have a job description, or maybe I don't have a job description. But nonetheless, what are the key performance indicators? So I think it's asking those questions. So at the end of this year, you're going to mark me on certain things. I need to be clear on those things. Yeah, so be clear on what you're being marked against. Ask those questions. If you're not comfortable or satisfied with anything, raise a grievance. Don't keep quiet, because some people just keep quiet. So raise an official grievance. Let it run and let it take its course. At the end of the day, also know and realize that there are certain steps that can never be skipped, in the sense that the performance must be done up to standard, and due process has to take its course, and there cannot be any shortcuts. But by all means, be clear on your KPIs, raise grievances when you need to raise the grievances, but know that your employer is well within their rights to demand what they have brought you on board to do. So I think that's what I would say.
So it's both ways, in terms that a good employment relationship, from what you're saying, is that set very clear expectations.
Correct.
Have a system that monitors them.
Yes.
And if they're not working, have an open and an honest discussion.
Correct.
But document it.
Exactly.
I think the issue of documentation is where a lot of things are missed out.
Yeah.
And then, there are gaps in the whole process.
Correct.
Okay?
Correct.
But also there is this aspect around, compliance to employment contracts.
Yes.
You signed a contract.
Yeah.
It has a notice period.
Yeah.
You decide you want to go. You don't adhere to the notice period and move on. Do you see that a lot?
That's extremely common. That's actually extremely common. But you see, the law actually gives the employer certain rights. In the sense that if somebody leaves and they've not given you due notice, you can claim it, or you can deduct it from the person's terminal dues. The challenge sometimes is that there's nothing, the terminal dues might not be able to cater for the full value of the person's pay. And so as an employer, you have to then make the decision. Are we going to send a demand letter to this person? Or are we going to escalate this matter to court if they don't respond to that demand letter? But to answer your question, yes, it's a very common scenario. But more and more employers are deciding to actually, take it up. If it's a contractual entitlement, a contractual right, you owe me notice, then you should give that requisite notice. If not, it will be deducted from your terminal dues. And if not, you might also just find yourself in court. If you raise a claim against your employer, the employer will counterclaim and say, you also didn't give me the notice you were supposed to give me.
If people are members of professional institutes or whatever, and they've left in a manner that doesn't comply with the professional guidelines, does the employer have a right to escalate that to the professional institute if it's in the contract and if it's not in the contract?
Okay. Well, it depends. It really does depend. I think sometimes you have to go through the relevant statute. So, for example, if you're dealing with accountants, you have to look at the Accountants Act. What is considered as misconduct under the Accountants Act? And if it's something that falls as misconduct, then by all means, you can take that escalation route. If you're dealing with a different professional, maybe an architect or any other professional, you need to just look at that primary statute and then see, is this something that I can escalate? And obviously, if it's something that you can escalate, then it becomes a bit of a deterrent, because nobody wants to be viewed negatively by the regulator. You always want to keep, make sure you're in good books with your regulator. So if it's something you can escalate, most definitely. If not, there may be a challenge, because sometimes somebody can come after you and say, hey, you're now, breaching my privacy rights by going to disclose things that somebody else has no basis to know about. So it then becomes something you have to be very careful how you manage. Same thing with employers who would put somebody's picture in the newspaper and then say, so-and-so is no longer our employee. And the court has ruled that you can't do that. You're defaming somebody, you're misusing their image and all that. So you have to be careful.
Either way,
Yeah.
a mutual separation on agreed terms is always better. Because apart from the court process,
Yeah.
if you're habitually doing that,
Yeah.
there's also this issue around getting a reference. And somebody might not put it on a letter,
True.
but will always say,
Don't touch that one.
don't touch that person.
Yeah.
And, then your credibility also
Yeah.
suffers.
Yeah.
Uh,
The only challenge with, again, mutual separations, yes, I agree with you. And sometimes employers are very hesitant to go that route. And I understand, because what's the message that it's conveying? That you can misbehave or perform poorly and then get away with a mutual separation. But at the same time, as an employer, you're not rewarding that person. You're actually just buying finality. You're taking a commercial decision to end this relationship amicably, to bring an end to this, and to know that for sure I'm not going to end up in court and then end up in the Court of Appeal for many years and then have to show up and testify. So if you can do a mutual separation, I think best case scenario. But it does come with, you have to think through, like, what message am I sending to everybody else every time I do a mutual separation?
And if everybody did a mutual separation, you wouldn't have work to go to court and defend people. Yeah.
We will still help you, navigate through the mutual separation. But can you imagine that people sign mutual separations and then they still go to court?
Yes,
And then they will claim that I was coerced or unduly influenced or pressured into signing this. So I am telling you. Yeah.
I was also told, and I don't know, that every conversation has to have two people, not one person in the room.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Or immediately, if it's just one person, I would immediately confirm it on email.
Yes.
With a big, without prejudice, we've just had this conversation. I think it's important too. But two people is safe. Yeah.
And as an employee, one of the critical aspects now is this desire to grow very quickly and very fast. What is your view about, this continuous change of jobs and other? Do you see at the end of the day, somewhere along the line, you get trapped somewhere in that journey?
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful about the message it sends. So I think for any employer, if you look through a CV and you're like, this person was jumping ship like every couple of months or every year, you're like, wow, then it means I might bring you on board, invest so much in you, and then by the time I'm ready to reap my investment, you're also going. So I think you have to think through, what is a timeline that I'm able to give an employer? And I think I've had people talk about 2 years, 2 years safe, then you can jump ship. But if it's something that's happening too frequently, I think you will lose a lot along that journey, even in terms of, people being able to invest in you, people looking at you and thinking, you are a flight risk. So I think it can work against somebody. I would suggest a longer period, at least 2 years I've had is a safe period. Then you can go and, explore a different work environment. Yeah.
But too many 2 years also has its downfalls. Yeah,
It's true. You
because you never stick around
exactly
to learn the tricks of trade.
Exactly. So by the time people are just beginning to entrust you with heavier or more responsibilities, or maybe now you even have a team to grow, you're gone. And now you're moving to the next place. So I think it works against, I think can work against somebody. Yeah. But I think, and I have to just point this out, I think as an employee, the worst thing you can do is bury your head in the sand and not be proactive about your career. Because then what happens is that when a redundancy comes, it hits you so much harder because you hadn't anticipated it and you hadn't been making plans. You have not been upskilling. So you find yourself completely lost. And I know those situations sometimes are inevitable, but I think it's upon all of us. Like, in the same way every business sits down to ask itself, how are we doing? Our business can be overtaken very quickly. I think it's incumbent on an employee to also sit and ask themselves, what would happen if I lose this job? Begin upskilling, begin looking for other opportunities. But the point I'm trying to make is be very proactive about, growing your career and channeling your career to places where, so that you're not unnecessarily caught unawares by some of the things that inevitably, can happen. Yeah.
And build the layers of experience.
Exactly.
Because, the initial experience is very basic.
Yeah.
As you build on those platforms,
Yeah.
you are able to understand your profession much better.
Correct.
And deal with complex situation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Good. Any concluding remarks for our viewers, both for employers and employees?
Yeah. I think for employers, it's normally, just get your house in order. Somebody asked me the other day, is it common for employers to have like employment lawyers, on retainer? And I just told them, I don't know that you cannot afford to, in this day and age, the person may not necessarily be on retainer, but you do need somebody to call and make sure that your paperwork is in order. Are your contracts in order? Are your policies in order? Are your procedures in order? Have you trained your line managers? Have you trained your teams to be able to mitigate risks that emanate from people management as much as possible? So for employers, it's get your house in order. It's just a matter of time, really. I don't think nowadays you can escape it. It's for employees, at the end of the day, is also to know there is this court decision. Many times when employers start managing performance actively, perhaps initiating a PIP, then somebody will come and say, I'm being harassed. But the court has also made it very clear that for an employer to hold you accountable for what you are brought on board to do, that's not harassment. So it's, yes, you know your rights, but also know that you have to give that which you've been brought on board to do. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anne, for being with us today and sharing your knowledge about the evolving landscape in HR today and the impact that it can have on both the employer and the employee, but also some of the changes that are important if you want to grow Kenya as an outsourcing hub, which is a critical part of the pillars of growth that we are seeing. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying the conversation we bring to you on the Insight Edge and would like us to keep delivering fresh perspectives and new topics, please support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel and turning on the notifications so you never miss a new episode.